Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Sunday, November 7th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Purdue game is in 6 days. The game against Michigan in 20 days. Those Purdue Boilermakers just knocked off number 3 Michigan State on Saturday night, which perhaps helped put Ohio State's somewhat close win over Nebraska in some perspective for Buckeye fans. Ohio State still has some issues to work through, but they had a much better Saturday than a lot of other teams in the college football playoff top 25. To take a run through some of those issues and perhaps give you a little more perspective, my guest today is Buckeye Scoop's Tony Gerdeman. Tony, I guess one thing Ohio State fans can feel good about is that they only have one more true road game left on the schedule because their last true road game on Saturday was not a ton of fun.
Yeah, that's a great point where they can just try to get through these next couple of weeks at home in familiar environment, comfortable, not having to deal with the kind of crowd and situation they found themselves in on Saturday. So there is that. It's better to be home than on the road. And just imagine if they had, what would their mindset be if they had, say, another road game next week? If this game was at Purdue next week rather than being home, I know there would be a lot of people jumping on that Purdue bandwagon right now, and there may still be some after, in the next few days.
Yeah, going to Purdue this time of year, like, nope, hard pass. I think any team in the top 10 is going to nope that. And, getting that Minnesota road game out of the way real early in the year. At the time, we looked at that as, oh, this is really helpful for Ohio State in terms of weather. Like, just not having to get on a plane and go to Minnesota now. Like, I'm sure they are very glad they have that one behind them. They are probably also very glad they have that Nebraska game behind them as well. Let's start with the good news. Jackson Smith-Njigba. Holy Moses. Jackson Smith-Njigba playing. No Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson was out for the week. Sounds like that's just going to be a, real short-term thing. He should be back next week. But playing without Garrett Wilson, with Chris Olave getting a whole bunch of attention, all Jackson Smith-Njigba did was set a single-game record with 15 receptions, come very close to breaking the Ohio State single-game yardage receiving record with 240, scored a 75-ish yard touchdown. Is that all? I don't know, Tony, that seems pretty good. And it seems like, the guy that we've kind of been going, hey, this guy's going to be pretty good sometime. Seems like we can have that conversation in the present tense now.
Yeah, very close to 1,000-yard season now, 888 yards on the season. He could end up getting that next week against Purdue. But I think one of the more amazing things, 15 catches, 18 targets. And that's a lot of targets, but only 3 missed opportunities between him and CJ Stroud. And that 75-yarder was a 7-yard catch and a 68-yard run. And everything we've been seeing from Jackson Smith-Njigba from the time he arrived, I think we all saw it on Saturday, where is this what it's going to look like quite a bit next year? I don't think you ever expect 15 for 240 and maybe 8 for 130 is about the most you can expect to average for any Ohio State receiver in this offense, just because there's so many others and you can't even expect that. But I think he's in for a big year next year, but he's also having a big year right now and one of the top receivers in the Big Ten, and stepped up in a huge way without Garrett Wilson. I think it was clear that Wilson was missed. CJ Stroud certainly missed him, but you see who he is has this connection with, and I think that goes back to working together last year, working together all off season. And just when he's the guy in the slot, you need to put you can't just go with a nickel or a safety or, God forbid, a linebacker. And Ohio State can do so many things to get that ball to Jackson Smith-Njigba and all kinds of favorable matchups and just dropping it and sitting in a zone and things like that. And then he makes the most of it. And sometimes making the most of it is just catching it and getting a yard forward and just keeping the drive going. And he is really, really good, just as, Tom, you said he'd be.
Yeah, I remember watching him during the first practice of spring ball last year when it was right before COVID. It was like the only practice we got to watch last spring. And you and I came out of that practice going, holy smokes, this kid is going to be real, real good. Like, you can't always tell with a freshman right away. Sometimes it takes a little while. For him, it was literally the first time we saw him on a practice field. It was like, yep, there it is. That's what about to be real good looks like. So that has worked out okay for Ohio State. CJ Stroud also has worked out pretty well for Ohio State. 36 of 54, 405 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 picks. Definitely not his best game. there were people saying he's completely regressed to what he was at the beginning of the season. That probably seems a little strong to me. He did run a couple times, but not a ton. Give me your evaluation of CJ Stroud. Was that a step forward? Was that a step backward? Was that just kind of like it was a game and it was okay and he has to be better? Like, where are you on CJ Stroud right now?
Maybe a couple of steps in place where he's just keeping the blood flowing in the legs at this point and not necessarily moving forward or moving backward. They did 2 interceptions. Neither of those were good interceptions. Not that there's maybe such a thing as a good interception. So that, I mean, it was 4 or 5 games since he had thrown an interception. So obviously that's a step back there. But this is a guy who still completed 2/3 of his passes, threw for over 400 yards, was sacked a couple of times, but was pressured quite a bit. And this is a road environment that is not easy for quarterbacks. And I mean, I'll say this every season, every game this season. This was his 8th start. Next Saturday, it'll be his 9th start. These are all learning experiences, and so yeah, to have 300-400-yard passing games already, he's 2 behind Dwayne Haskins as the career leader at Ohio State. It's odd to me that I guess we don't appreciate that as much as we would have 5 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. And you just expect perfection. And nobody on this roster is going to give perfection. No quarterback is. Is it okay to ask for some better play? Sure. Run it instead of throwing an interception. Absolutely. This was the first game where I felt like he could have run the ball rather than just looking for the throw. Because I think in the past, when he has scrambled and looked for the throw instead of picking up yards, he's picked up yards with the pass. So it's like whether you get yards running or throwing, does it really matter? I don't think it does. But there were a couple of opportunities where he could have picked up 5, 6, 7 and chose not to in this one. And that just, people have been calling for it for a couple of weeks now, and it really showed itself today. But maybe this is the time where now it will resonate with them, because you throw an interception on something you could have picked up a few yards on, that's going to stick with you. Not completing an 11-yard pass when you could have picked up 6 running the ball.
Yeah. That's, and not running the ball and some of the missed opportunities there happen in the red zone. Second week in a row, Ohio State has really struggled in the red zone. That was something that really hurt them in the Oregon game as well. They were in the red zone 3 times. They scored 1 touchdown, kicked 2 field goals, kicked 2 other field goals, kind of just outside the red zone. I mean, I think that has to be a concern for Ohio State now, that you keep getting bogging down in the same area. You keep settling for field goals. And, we'll talk about the defense in a minute. The defense is absolutely better. But, when the offense keeps bogging down in the same spots, this week you could say, okay, well, they didn't have Garrett Wilson. So, I mean, that's got to be part of it. Well, they had Garrett Wilson last week and they still had the same problems. They're struggling to run the ball. They're struggling to get a lot of push on the inside, on any kind of interior runs. I mean, I think that's something where you're getting a lot of people kind of raising their hands going, yes, I think this has gone from like weird thing to like officially like maybe a little bit of a concern.
Well, I think when it comes up against 2 of the better defenses the Buckeyes have placed and that they've played in the last 6 weeks or whatever, it's hard to ignore. They didn't have red zone problems until these last 2 weeks, and these are maybe the 2 best defenses they've played in Big Ten play. And so now you're seeing these problems pop up. And yeah, 1 touchdown out of 3 red zone trips, that's not good, and certainly wasn't good last week. What is the answer? And last week was just making mistakes they shouldn't have made. This week, getting outplayed, not getting the run blocking that you need, not getting the protection that you need. So to me, that's just getting beat up front, not executing. This would be you're still blaming yourself, but this isn't necessarily self-inflicted. This is getting beaten. And so to me, that's the more concerning thing than Travion Henderson false started last week. And then here, Paris Johnson got beat on a slant or whatever. To me, that's much more concerning than simple mistakes. These are, I wouldn't call these simple mistakes. These are just not getting the job done. And it's in a position where the job absolutely has to get done on the road in a close game and it's not. So yeah, that's very concerning to me.
Yeah, that's a second game in a row where, sort of the post game talk has been like, well, if they just make a couple more plays, if they just finish a couple of these drives, then we're not talking about this as a close game. It's like, well, yes, but they actually have to do it. They actually have to finish those drives and make those plays. Because yeah, if you turn a couple of those threes into sevens against Penn State and against Nebraska, we're having, I think, very, very different conversations about this team and, levels of concern moving forward. One thing that I think has to be a concern is it just feels like Ryan Day in close games. Urban Meyer had the QB power thing, and you would just see JT Barrett get run 20 times. It's Penn State week, so JT Barrett's just going to run QB power 20 times. Ryan Day's binky is forget the run, we're going to pass the ball. They had 54 passes, 24 carries by the running backs. Ryan Day has talked about wanting to have balance, and he has defined balance as, same number of runs and passes, more or less. They got way out of whack. He talked after one of the games earlier in the year about the fact that, looking back, he probably made a mistake and got too pass happy. He did it again on Saturday. And part of that was they were not running the ball real well. They averaged 3 yards a carry, and, sack adjusted, it was a little better than that. It was like 24 carries for the running backs for 104 yards or something like that. But, that I think that's a little bit of a concerning trend as well. And if you can't run the ball in the red zone, that's one of the reasons you're having problems in the red zone.
Yeah, they never really established the run, even when they were successful, quote unquote, successful running the ball with TreVeyon Henderson early in the game. And granted, it was 3 yards, 5 yards, 4 yards, 6 yards, 3 yards. They kept, staying on schedule or staying even ahead of schedule, but they wouldn't stick with it. And it would be one carry and then 2 or 3 or 4 passes, then another carry. I don't think it was until maybe the second quarter where there were consecutive carries by TreVeyon Henderson, maybe not even until the third quarter. But you look at the first quarter, 6 rushes, 15 passes. The second quarter, and it's a little bit more balanced, but still it's just 10 rushes and 15 passes. Then in the third quarter, 4 rushes and 13 passes. So at that point, you've got 43 passes to 20 rushes through 3 quarters. And that's no kind of balance. And I don't know, is that a lack of faith in your offensive line and the run blocking? Is that something you're seeing? Ryan Day says every time they're doing something, it's because they're seeing something or they're trying to accomplish something. So I'm going to assume, and this is something maybe you should talk to Ross Bolton about, Tom, moving forward. But I'm going to assume that obviously they felt that throwing the ball was their best option, and whatever they were being shown by Nebraska, it just didn't lend itself to running. And based on the results, it's hard to disagree. But for people who tout balance, I mean, I guess we're talking about the ability to do whatever you need whenever it's needed, and if something is taken away, being able to do that. And they still put up over nearly 500 yards of offense. So I guess there's balance in that. You take one thing away and they can still do the other, but you've also got to do it in the red zone.
Yeah, and this is not the best defense they're going to face all year. They have, Nebraska is a far, far, far improved team. That's, I think, something we've been talking about all year, that this is a much better Nebraska team than they faced in previous trips to Lincoln. But yeah, I mean, they have even better teams on the horizon. If we want to look at the other side of the ball, you have to feel good about the Ohio State defense. I mean, they gave up a couple long plays. There was that one long touchdown pass and the other the long pass where the tackling was not exemplary, where that set up that second Nebraska touchdown. But outside of that, they were pretty good. And, after weeks when we were talking about like, boy, this Ohio State defense just can't get off the field on third down. And oh man, they got off the field. They got the first 9 third downs they got off the field, and they were, they held Nebraska to 2 for 13 on third down. I mean, overall, it's not perfect, and you still do see some concerns, especially in the back end with some of those big plays. But the defensive line was better. They're getting off the field on third down. I think Ohio State fans can feel maybe kind of okay about this defense now.
I would agree with that. 17 points on the road against an offense that has some skill and some talent, and you give up a couple of big plays for the bulk of those yards. held Nebraska to a season low in yardage. Yards per play weren't outrageous, making tackles for the most part. But there's enough there to clean up to where, yeah, this thing can still get better, and it needs to. But I agree, the defensive line stepping up as a defense. They had five sacks, eight tackles for loss. There's a lot to like right now, and Steel Chambers gets back in there, and he is productive right away. 6 tackles in the second half, and it's probably a good thing that maybe it's a good thing that Ohio State didn't open with Minnesota or didn't open with Nebraska this year, and instead opened with Minnesota, because this is a much more well equipped defense to handle what Nebraska does. And I don't know how well equipped they would have been to do it in the season opener.
I will remind you that in the opening week of the season, Nebraska lost to Illinois. So, so maybe, but yes, you're right. I mean, this is an extremely different team than it was the first couple weeks of the season, especially on the defense. One thing that has remained very consistent throughout the year, kicker Noah Ruggles. He's just 15 for 15 this year on field goals. That's it. That's all. 15 for 15. I mean, that's, pretty good. I think ideally you'd like to have that number be still at 100%, but a lot lower because you're scoring more touchdowns and not kicking field goals. But, he has been, for a guy who was just sort of this afterthought transfer from North Carolina that, they had Jake Seibert, and it was like, well, they have their kicker for next year. And then Seibert was on the injury report a little bit, but it was a battle throughout camp where I think Ruggles just kind of beat him out. And he's turned into this incredible weapon for Ohio State. He's not making kicks from 60 yards or anything, but right now, 45 and in, it's just like, okay, well, it's no Ruggles, so he's going to make it. And then, that feels like something that it hasn't mattered yet for Ohio State, to, a kick to win a game, but it sort of feels like somewhere down the stretch, he's going to have a real big kick with a game on the line.
Well, and we've seen him, he's very accurate. And that Penn State game, he had a kick that was like, you could see Ryan Day reacting on the sidelines. That was close. But he was solid in this one. And I do think he kicked a game winner. I think that last one gave Ohio State that 9-point lead. And the momentum at that point, would it have shocked you if, say, he misses that, Nebraska goes down and scores a touchdown and has the extra point to win the game? The momentum at that point was with Nebraska, even though he kicked it with 1:29 on the clock. But, anything can happen, and he eliminated that possibility. So, and it was, another one right down the middle. He's done so well. More just very solid, even more than solid. He's been fantastic. I mean, let's just go ahead and, without talking too much about him and, rallying up the football gods, this guy has been everything Ohio State could have hoped for and much more. And I don't know that Ohio State and Ryan Day had planned on using him this much, but I do also wonder, obviously they wouldn't be if he hadn't been so accurate. They would be going for more fourth downs. Maybe they'd be scoring more points had he been an iffy kicker.
I did wonder about that at one point today, and I wasn't sure I wanted to put that one out into the universe. But yeah, I don't know if I would want my head coach to be extremely comfortable with my kicker to the point where it's like, well, just do that, and he'll make it. So that that kind of changes the calculus in the coach's head a little bit, and not necessarily in the direction you would want that to change the calculus in the coach's head. And now that we mentioned this is the next to last road game of the season, but the next 4 weeks, man, it is going to be a really, really fascinating down the stretch for Ohio State. Purdue at home next week, and boy, that looks like a pretty big game all of a sudden, that with them coming off a win over Michigan State. Then Michigan State at home, which you knew Michigan State was going to blow that. That was you could see that cab coming down Broadway with all its doors open. Yep, there it is. The Sparty going to West Lafayette the week after a big game against Michigan. What could possibly go wrong? And, but you've got Michigan State. Michigan State's a good team. Then you got to go to Michigan. Then you've got probably Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. This Ohio State team feels like it's good enough to beat any and all of those teams, but running that 4-team gauntlet right in a row is going to be brutal a way to close the season.
And the defense may be equipped for it. The offense needs to get more equipped for it and really toughen up. And I keep going back to, have they been toughening up? Ryan Day talks about tough love and all of this and being tough and toughness. But does the offense, when they're throwing the ball 60% of the time, is that really instilling the toughness that you're going to need and that you want from your team? So they're going to have to bounce back a little bit, regroup, and reset the tone of the offense, I think, and start to impose their wills. And if they can't, then good luck going 4-0 over these next four games, because if they're not running the ball and imposing their will, I mean, there's all of the games are going to be like this from now on, and you can't live like this.
Yeah, you have to give yourself a little more margin for error, and that means 7s instead of 3s when you're in the red zone, and making the opponent drive down the field and not giving up that 1 or 2 big plays. So yeah, that is going to be a fascinating final 4 games of the season. But this is shaping up to be a wild final month of college football. We just had a crazy Saturday. Tons of ranked teams lost on Saturday. Probably more going to happen next week. And so make sure you stick with us here. Subscribe to all of our podcasts. You can find them wherever you find great podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. Tony and I did a long post-game instant reaction show, much more in-depth on the Ohio State-Nebraska game, along with Kevin Noon on the Buckeye Weekly feed. You can find that. We have Gives in the Bank, do a great recruiting podcast, and much more. So just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. And if you're on YouTube, hit that bell, subscribe to our channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. We do pregame shows, we do postgame shows, we do a Friday, afternoon usually, or afternoon or evening live show answering your questions, kind of previewing the weekend of college football and the Buckeye game and all that. So youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop, subscribe there as well. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.